You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. By going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com, you can make this possible. Folks, that's what it sounded like on the streets of Ferguson, Missouri 5 years ago, August 2014, when Mike Brown was killed by Ferguson police there. What transpired since was really when the Black Lives Matter really blew up. Activists all across the country launched initiatives leading to massive protests across the country. Also, legislation that began to change the whole dynamic when it comes to mass incarceration as well as police brutality. Of course, Dorian Johnson was one of those men who said that Mike Brown had his hands up at the time of the shooting. Of course, people also remember that the body of Mike Brown was there in the streets for a very long period before his body was taken away, causing, again, more people to be angry with how the treatment took place. So many things have taken place since the death of Mike Brown 5 years ago. But certainly for his family, it was a very difficult situation because they're still dealing with that. His mother, of course, Carolyn McFadden, she ran for public office recently for the city council, did not win. But right now, we're joined by Mike Brown Sr., the father of Mike Brown, to get his thoughts and reflections on this day and what he still wants to see happen when it comes to justice for his son. Michael, Roland Martin, welcome to Roland Martin Unfiltered.
How you doing, brother?
Man, it's good to always talk to you and to see you. Unfortunately, we connected as a result of the death of your son. Even though it's 5 years later, it still has to be hard for you not to be able to hug your son, to see him grow up, to see him date, to see him go to work, and not to hear his sound of his voice at all. What are your feelings on this day 5 years later?
Definitely emotions is all over the place. You know, we still dealing. You know, today ended up being a okay day. We had the press conference this morning demanding the prosecutor, the new prosecutor, to reopen the case. 11 a.m. we did the regular ceremony, you know, and then now we are into community day where we have vendors and people. We have people from all over the place here, you know. So it's kind of happy, sad, you know, day, you know, because I'm definitely seeing people enjoy themselves out here. So that kind of helps.
When we hear the phrase, someone did not die in vain, the reality is the death of your son coming on literally right after the death of Eric Garner, the death of course, in Walmart in Beaver Creek, Ohio, of John
Right.
Crawford III. All of
Right.
those deaths literally happened weeks apart.
Mm-hmm.
If we can say his death was not in vain, is that it led to this massive resistance, the waking up of a generation of people who said, like Fan Lou Hamer, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And they really took to the streets and organized and really began to move. And now we have DAs, progressive DAs being elected. You have a new district attorney there in St. Louis County. You have folks who are now talking about mass incarceration. We had pressure on Congress, pressure on President Barack Obama, pressure on governors. All of that really came out of not just, of course, the jury verdict in the Trayvon Martin, but really culminated and really took off with the death of your son. That has to at least provide you some sense of solace.
Well, you know, it's moving. It's moving forward. You know, definitely these people that's getting in the office, they need to start doing their job. You know, you've been voted in to do what you're supposed to do or what you committed to. So we're just waiting to see what's next.
Obviously, things did not change as fast there in Ferguson. With the election of a city council there was a new police chief in Ferguson as well. What do you want to see happen now, 5 years after the death of your son? What more do you want to see done?
I want the case reopened. I want the case reopened, and I want police to do more engaging into the community. You know, they need to start knocking on doors, you know, jumping out their core, playing with the community, you know, and introducing themselves as community, because they're part of the community, you know. So we definitely need them to start doing a lot of changes on that, and I guess that's a start.
Well, Mike Brown, it is always a pleasure, brother, to see you. Our prayers certainly continue to go out to you and the family. It is a very difficult day, just like every day since his death. But I will say that our focus will continue to be highlighting these stories, holding folks accountable, and we certainly want to see other folks, African Americans and others, stand up for righteousness and holding police accountable for these type of killings. And we certainly appreciate you joining us on this day.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
All right, brother. Thanks a lot. I want to introduce my panel right now. Johanna LeBlanc, National Security and Foreign Affairs legal analyst. Lauren Victoria Burke. She's with the NNPA. Robert Patillo, civil rights attorney. Robert, I want to start with you. As I said there to Mike Brown Sr., we saw a tremendous response to the death of Mike Brown. We can talk about Gina 6. We can talk about Trayvon Martin, the protests and the mobilization after his death, but then, of course, also with the verdict in the George Zimmerman case. But there was something different that happened with Mike Brown that led to this massive change when it comes to activism in the United States.
You're absolutely right. And I think what it did was empower a generation. It empowered a group of people who have never been taught to before, who realized that the civil rights movement of the 1960s was not upon Mount Olympus, but rather was built by young people who were enthusiastic, who were ready to make a change. And I think that this movement still continues, because what we have failed to see is the changes in policing policy that were promised after Ferguson. Every jurisdiction around the country said, we're going to switch to community policing. We're going to get officers out of the cars and walking the streets. We're going to have more people from the neighborhood policing those communities and have more interaction with the actual citizens between officers, and we have not seen this happen. What we have to do is turn those ideas of activism into actual policies. We've seen new DAs elected, new solicitors elected nationwide. We have to keep that push going. We have to reduce the prison population for African Americans, stop the over-policing of black communities that led to shootings such as Mike Brown, and have an understanding that police policy is community policy, and if we're not involved in such, then we are the victims of such.
Lauren Victoria Burke, the reality is there are some people who will say nothing has changed, it's all the same, but frankly that's a lie. Things have actually happened, but the reality is the wheels of justice are slow. Yeah. And the time that people have put in has been effective. You think about the bill that Congressman Bobby Scott passed, where Black Lives Matter activists, where he said to the Republicans, y'all better pass this bill when it comes to police killings, or there's going to be a problem. Republicans heard that. So you have seen action. You've seen action on the local, state, and national level. It's just a matter of needing more action.
Yeah. The Congressman Scott's bill was, of course, a bill to just count, to mandate that there had to be a count of people who were killed by police. You would think that we would have been doing that already, but actually we weren't. And to even though the bill passed, it's hard to get the Justice Department to actually do it. I actually think that Michael Brown's death is really sort of attached to Trayvon Martin, which of course happens in 2012, 2 years before. Obviously there was a legislative push behind Stand Your Ground that was not particularly successful, but what happens 2 years later in Ferguson was, of course, the furtherance of the Black Lives Matter movement in a more dramatic way that actually, I think, ignited not just Black Lives Matter and a younger generation of activists, but it actually ignited the older legacy civil rights groups as well, because I think they felt very conscious of the fact that these younger groups were coming, and so they had to do a little bit more than they had been doing. So it really ignited everybody. It not only rose the consciousness, it had some real electoral effects. Obviously, Wesley Bell and the defeat of Robert McCullough, which was huge. So it ignited the Ferguson community to finally wake up to their voting power, which took a long time, probably longer than it should have. But we're at a place now where, thanks to a lot of those activists from Ferguson, there's a deeper analysis on criminal justice policy that we didn't see before. And it's a really deep dive, policy-driven analysis. It's not that it wasn't there before, but it's there even more, and younger activists are driving it. So that was really good to see.
Johanna was also clear that this thing went international. The reality is many of these activists, they've actually traveled around the world, aligning themselves with activists from other parts of the globe. You've had folks in other countries communicating through social media, talking about what they need to be doing in their countries. And so the death of Mike Brown really did spark a global movement, not just here in the United States.
Yeah, Roland Martin, I would agree. The notion of the use of excessive force by police officers is not unique only to the United States. It's actually a global phenomenon. In fact, places like South Africa, after that incident occurred, people rose up and people were protesting in their own respective communities, in their own respective countries, about some of the flawed systems that they have that targeted people of color. And as you know, South Africa is a place where, that has a history of the apartheid system very similar to the United States when it comes to race relations pertaining to people of color. So South Africans throughout South Africa rallied and they were protesting, and because they too could relate to what was happening here in the U.S. But another point I want to make, Roland, is that yes, what happened in Ferguson was tragic. There have been a great push. There have been a lot of activism. But what I want is I want the policies around the use of excessive force, the laws, to change. Because ultimately, until that law changes in various countries, in various jurisdictions, you won't really see that much of improvement in terms of how police react when they encounter people of color in the area of, how they feel when, if they've been attacked by someone or they feel threatened by someone. So until the law changes at the state, local, and maybe even the federal level, we won't really see much change. I really want to see these policies changed.
Well, again, though, but the reality is this here, and that is you're not going to see such change on the federal level because, frankly, local law enforcement is local. And that's one of the things I think the activists also learned. There was such a focus on federal, congressional action, but then for people who didn't understand the process, they begin to realize it's like, okay, goodness, man, I think it's really on the local level, which is why we've seen in the last 5 years a different push to elect district attorneys, because they're the ones who actually prosecute. They're the ones who go to the grand jury. And so, again, we've seen the election of progressive DAs, and the reality, Lauren and Robert, that would not have happened without this realization in the aftermath of the death of Mike Brown.
And the other thing that would not have happened is that in 2015, DOJ looked at Ferguson and saw how the local police department was shaking down the local community in terms of fines and fees. And it was so pervasive that the DOJ was able to put together like a huge report on it, something that everybody had suspected, that the black community was being over-policed, but it had a major economic impact as well.
Well, and just kind of to piggyback on that idea of the federal role in this, let's not undercut the power of the federal government to regulate issues such as this. We have a Department of Justice right now that does not investigate civil rights violations, that does not prosecute police officers for even the most egregious cases of police brutality and the violations of individual rights. In the 1960s, what the Department of Justice was able to do was go into local racist jurisdictions and regulate things and change the local policies that cannot be changed on the local level. So while we have these presidential candidates running around talking about busing in the 1970s and talking about reparations and talking about every other issue under the sun, we have to make sure we hold their feet to the fire, because this is the longest sustained social action that our community has had probably in the last 30 years, and we need to see this taken as a #1 priority by the people who are asking for our votes.
All right, folks, back to that Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment. All right, folks, you've heard me talk a lot about marijuanastock.org. Why? Because I want to keep you informed of investment opportunities that make sense. We've all watched the growth of the cannabis industry. A recent report by New Frontier Data estimates the global cannabis market at more than $340 billion. We know that marijuana legalization is sweeping the country state by state. We also know that marijuana has a good cousin, the hemp plant, with a much higher concentration of CBD. That means hemp gives you all of the medical benefits of marijuana without getting you high. Until recently, hemp farming was practically illegal in the United States and heavily regulated by the DEA. However, the 2018 Farm Bill changed all of that, making it legal to grow hemp CBD in the U.S. and creating one of the largest commodities worldwide. Folks, they need land to grow all of the plants. This is not rocket science. It's real simple. It's an incredible investment opportunity, and that's where our friends at 420 Real Estate come in. Their business model is simple. They buy land that supports hemp CBD grow operations and lease it to licensed, high-paying tenants. That's right, they are hemp CBD landlords, and you can get in on the action. My friends at 420 Real Estate decided to do something special for the Roland Martin Unfiltered fan base. Originally, the minimum investment level was $500. Right now, you can invest in this crowdfunding campaign for as little as $200. That's right, anywhere from $200 up to $10,000. Let me recap. This is a $340 billion industry that is still growing. And you can participate with as little as $200. To invest, go to marijuanastock.org. That's marijuanastock.org. Get in the game and get in the game now. Now back to your Roland Martin Unfiltered video.